How are you doing, Keane?
Yeah, I'm good. Hope
Good
you are feeling good now.
I took a nice nap since we last talked. Yeah. So for everyone that's watching, we're going to be talking about the importance of player empathy today. I'm Matthew Wong-Stewart from the community and channel team at Riot Southeast Asia, and this is Keane.
Yeah, and I'm Keane. I'm a game designer from the Riot Hong Kong and Singapore game studio.
So a little bit about me. Sorry for jumping the gun there. A little bit about me. I studied to be an architect. I have a lot of experience as an architect, an incredible 3 months worth, and I immediately quit that job to go into the gaming industry. I started with Garena Online as an esports associate, moved back into shoutcasting. I did full-time acting as well, and I have 8 years of esports commentary and acting experience. I have 9 years of experience managing different communities and channels, and this ranges from YouTube pages such as the Wild Banana accounts that I used to work on, YouTube channels. I manage a football community as well of over 80 people. I've managed different esports channels such as the OPL social media pages and the LPL social media pages in English. And now I've been managing different communities as well as game titles. And last but not least, the best quote I heard this year is he's one of the funniest people I know. And that was from Matthew Wong-Stewart. So shout out to that guy. He's great.
Hello, everyone. I'm Keane. I'm a game designer. I started off, I graduated from NUS. I grew up in Singapore. My first job in the industry is I joined Ubisoft Singapore as a game tester for Ghost Recon Online. Subsequently, I moved on to the Assassin's Creed franchise, where I work as a technical level designer for Assassin's Creed Black Flag and Assassin's Creed Unity, which I think are one of the best Assassin's Creeds. After that, I moved on to work on the R&D project Skulls and Bones, and did a bit on the open world as well as the multiplayer. And then I moved to Montreal and joined my friend at Scavenger Studio and worked on this indie game Darwin project for 2.5 years. And after that, I now move on to Riot. I joined in the Hong Kong office, in the Hong Kong game studio, and that was before the game Legends of Runeterra was announced. So, and now, but I'm now able to proudly say that I work on this game, and it has been 2 years since. And right now, I'm the design lead for the Hong Kong Singapore studio for this for one of the initiatives we have within Legends of Runeterra. So happy to share some of my experience with you all today.
And what we will be talking about today is what an inclusive community means and why it's important to Riot. I'm so sorry my puppies are being a little bit agitated in the background, but I'll try and move my microphone away from all of that. But we want to talk about creating inclusive communities for our games. And here at Riot, players are really the center of everything that we do. On the publishing side, this means that this really informs how we communicate as well as engage with the different communities around the region. And we also want to make sure that we create inclusive communities where our players can come together and find friends, enjoy events, as well as celebrate festivals and recognize different milestone achievements. So most important to me, an inclusive community is one that provides the feeling of acceptance and understanding. It is definitely important to find a community that fits your niche, be it a hardcore League of Legends group where every discussion talks about the importance of +5 AD in the previous patch notes, or a Destiny 2 clan that is willing to pull up with your horrible DPS phases and carry you to victory. And definitely not talking about me, by the way. So shout out to Salt Clan. But at the end of the day, we all come from different walks of life. And a community that welcomes you and accepts you for who you are is incredibly valuable and not only levels up your playing experience, but also fosters the support that we all need. Like sport, gaming is an incredibly social activity. Think back to the first few console releases where you would gather at a friend's house, you would take turns trying to take down a legendary boss, or meet up to trade Pokemon cards. This hasn't really changed over the last few years, but now with the internet and mobile phones and applications like Discord, that can really connect us within an instant. Gaming is even more social than it ever has been before. And communities are important for like-minded individuals to bond and get together. At Riot, we really strive to provide the best player experience possible with this, and we recognize the importance of building communities that our players want to be a part of, where they can truly be themselves without the fear of judgment and accept them for who they are. And there are also some negative connotations that are associated with gaming. Gaming and esports, despite their celebrated successes, are often linked to various social issues. For example, promoting violence or violent behavior, promoting gaming addiction, and causing youth to neglect their studies and responsibility. Even in Thailand, gaming is seen as promoting addiction, as deemed to be negative for physical and mental health, or enabling or promoting gambling behaviors through loot boxes and gacha systems. Not only that, there's also gatekeeping within games itself. It can be fairly toxic and make it unwelcoming, especially for new players. The industry, including Riot Games, have introduced various different measures to address these issues and make sure that our communities feel safe and as welcoming as possible. A big example for me is a lot of people used to tell me all the time that mobile gamers aren't real gamers. I mean, Dr. Disrespect is a notable figure who has been making this claim for ages. And that's just generally not true. Gamers come from all different backgrounds. I'm very sorry about this. Give me 1 second. So sorry about that. I was talking about mobile gaming and the perception that, you know, mobile gamers aren't real gamers, and this is just not true. Dr. Disrespect is saying that all the time, and you can find some amazing mobile gaming celebrities around the world. iFerg is my favorite example of this. He used to play Rules of Survival, has now moved on to PUBG Mobile, and he is known as one of the best shooting mobile players in the world. And he has been challenging this perception time and time again that mobile gamers aren't real gamers. And he finally got to do a one-on-one show match against Dr. Disrespect, where he won. And you really start to see that shift towards, you know what? Gamers can be anyone. It could be the person playing Candy Crush on the MRT. It could be somebody who's playing Pokemon at their local hobby shop. But if you find a game that you enjoy, you're a gamer, and we shouldn't, you know, gatekeep these people from enjoying the games that they truly enjoy. On top of that, there's always this perception that, you know, gamers are a bunch of geeks or nerds, and that's what you're going to become if you are a gamer. My dogs are getting a little bit too excited. And that's what you're going to become if you are a gamer. My mom was a Navy veteran and taught swimming and basketball for a career. My dad and his dad were professional footballers. They didn't understand why I always wanted to be online and play the games that I love, and really struggled to come to terms with that. I wanted to just play these games and meet the people that I've only ever known through playing online. They kept telling me I'd be a nerd or a geek, which now I wear as a badge of honor, and that it'd affect my studies and future career. Or I was wasting my time and regressing in social skills because of what I was doing. But the community that I grew up with have become lifelong friends of mine. I made a career through gaming. My social skills actually improved through the interactions that I had with many various different peoples of various different walks of life as well. I made my career through it, and my social skills improved. Last year, I even opened up about how an individual from this community that I'm now lifelong friends with even literally saved my life while I was going through a really huge bout of depression. And it shows that these support groups and these communities who were able to accept and understand me for who I am were incredibly valuable to me in all aspects of my life. And that's the type of communities we want to grow for everybody out there, to make sure they can feel accepted when they move into these communities. So at Riot Games, we do have some initiatives in place to ensure positive social behavior, especially within our communities. Some of the measures we put in place would be monitoring in-game behavior. One thing we want to do is empower players with improved communication tools, like the in-game ping wheel that you see in League of Legends, which can help promote better interactions and improve the overall experience. A lot of times you just don't want to talk to people when you're playing games. Pings are perfect for it. I love the ping system that came out with PUBG, and you see in Apex Legends as well. It's a great way to communicate without actually communicating. Riot is dedicated to player behavior teams, which use psychology tools to incentivize positive behavior, like the honor system, and deter negative behavior, like in-game reporting. And they also announced that there's a new practice called player dynamics, which are dedicated to help players and their vibrant communities flourish. Through research and cognitive science, sociology, as well as anthropology fields, we look to create new structures that can be applied to games, so its dedicated players and communities can be put in better positions to thrive. And throughout 2020, Riot Games has put forth a concerted effort to limit the impact a negative League of Legends player behavior can have on fellow teammates, foes, as well as the perception of the game's community. And we've seen significant improvement as we saw toxicity in the game slashed by about 30%. And at the same time, it's important for us to keep in touch with our communities while we help them grow. We use social listening as a whole within Southeast Asia to monitor the community sentiment and take a data-informed approach when it comes to monitoring our different communities. This keeps us up to date with the trends and changes and allows us to dive deeper into specific topics once we see notable changes with these tools. The latter of which is the most important aspect of social listening. While we're gathering all this data, it gives us a general idea of what's happening, but diving into the how and why are really important too. And this is where engaging and immersing ourselves within communities allows us to further understand and learn more. Within Southeast Asia, I truly admire the way that our community and channel specialists have been able to immerse themselves not only within the communities, but talk with key opinion leaders within each region as well. And that be Jaime from Singapore, Philippines, and Malaysia, Brigitte from Indonesia, as well as Sarah from Thailand. They always have their finger on the pulse within the communities that they manage within those respective countries. And through our programs like Riot SEA Communities Initiative, they've established direct channels of communication with key community leaders as well as key opinion leaders, where they're able to understand their pains, their wants, as well as their needs, and gather general feedback about anything, health-related issues, issues within the game itself, and their respective communities. Lastly, we always strive to make sure that we maintain this two-way engagement. It's super simple for us to post our patch notes, on the Runeterra Facebook page, and here you go, this is the changes that's going to happen. And it's really easy for us to just go through all the comments or hashtags and just see what feedback from players is going to look like. But those are all one-way communication streams. I give you information, you read it, that's great. But there's no conversation taking place. So conversing directly with our players in a two-way communication stream is incredibly important to us, especially when it comes to understanding issues at hand. And they're a great opportunity for us at Riot to directly communicate with our players, be it to celebrate a key cultural moment throughout the region, or get into a lengthy conversation on changes of patches of the game. Or that one time some Runeterra player decided it'd be great to post the screenshot of me accidentally destroying my own Nexus and had a great laugh about it. We joined in, we laughed about it too. I was the only one probably not laughing, but everyone else was laughing about it too. And at the end of the day, we're all gamers. We love to talk with our players and our communities and about the games that we play. It's also a great avenue for us to understand and learn and continually improve by connecting directly with the people who matter most, which would be you. I do want to talk a little bit about how we prioritize some of the negative connotations that are associated with video games as well. Firstly, I want to talk about mental health. In North America, we've partnered with the Public Good Project, a public health nonprofit, to design a free mental health advocacy guide for content creators, streamers, and moderators. And in Australia, we partnered with the National Youth Mental Health Organization, Headspace, to create online resources for League of Legends players to help raise the mental health literacy of young people. And we saw a lot of ambassadors from the scene, such as Jake Spawn-Tabiri, or we even saw Juice from the old Sin Esports jump in and, as role models in their communities, empower people to seek help where it's necessary and make sure that they understand mental health is important. We've also taken some steps to address gaming addiction as well. And addiction is a very, very difficult topic to talk about as a broad whole conversation. It is a disease and people need to seek help when they are addicted. And we take gaming addiction very seriously and are aware of our position to make a difference as game developers. In China, we've implemented anti-addiction systems in League of Legends, which introduces breaks for players after a 2-hour limit. And in Southeast Asia, we've done so through many campus talks and other programs where we share wellness pointers with students in Malaysia, Singapore, as well as in the Philippines. At the end of the day, our players are at the core of what we do here at Riot, and their experience in our games and their well-being are important to us. So we'll continue to explore more initiatives. We'll continue to make sure we have these conversations with you so that we can continue to support you in these areas and touch on the things that matter truly to you most. And for now, I'm going to pass it off to Keane, who's going to take you through the next part of this conversation.
Hello, thank you, Matthew. Okay, so thanks for having me here today to share with you again of my experience in development. So today my main topic to discuss is about the importance of player empathy in game development, and what I'm going to share is like the why and how are we doing this. So empathy is basically the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. And as a developer, I guess what we would be interested in is the player empathy, which is not only to understand and share the feelings of players, but also to understand that your development decision, how can it impact the players, and how could you create the best experience to make the player of your game very, very happy. And that's because that's because our audience are actually very unique. We believe we're actually very privileged working in the game industry, where our customers are actually very, very passionate and engaged with the product that we are making. Gamers, they spend a lot of time like using, watching, discussing, or even just thinking about games. And a lot of us, we spend our lifestyle that just basically define all around gaming. Like if you were playing World of Warcraft back then, you would go, you have to reach home by a certain time to attend your raid. So all these are actually very nuanced and context rich. And this passion for gaming is actually not something that is easily learned or acquired. So to understand a gamer, it goes really beyond just reading market data or research papers. Like, for example, you try to recall a time where you try to explain maybe to your parents or your classmates about a game that you really, really like. It's very hard to get this passion across to other people because it is a culture that is very context heavy and very nuanced, and is to go beyond how we do the best for our players really takes us to have deep understanding of the culture itself. And that means that for us to be able to make good decisions about the games that we make, we need to have a very deep understanding on how players think, the culture around their life, how it feels to be really dedicated to a game, an IP, a guild, or even the esports teams. Those are tools that can help us make better decisions. And all in all these decisions will allow us to create a much, much, much better and awesome player experience for our players and fans. So moving on, I'd like to share a little about me growing up in Singapore. So I grew up in Singapore, and one of the first social experience in game that I have was actually playing Magic the Gathering when I was in primary school. And if you see the pictures on the right, I think that only people who play back in the days will understand. We actually go all the way to Bishan to play. I myself, I live in Jurong. There's a comic book store that is quite near my place that I go and hang out with my group of friends. But over the weekend, we will travel all the way to Bishan and hang out outside the wall of JJ. And that's where we play Magic. We find other people to challenge and play with them. And when Pokemon was released, we also did Pokemon over there. And that was like, what we call the old school matchmaking. Like right now, when you play digital card games, you just press Q and you get matched with someone from USA right away. Back then, you travel like 45 minutes to another part of Singapore and you play with new people, make new friends, create social bonding. And that is a kind of experience that is very, very unique. And I can still remember it till this day, which is amazing. Then subsequently, of course, we know that after that, there's a digital revolution. We play more PC and console games after that. Instead of playing a card game, I went on to play like Counter-Strike in LAN Shop, what we call LAN Shop, which is Cyber Cafe in Singapore. And we subsequently, there's online and all that. And eventually, Hearthstone was released. And this game, they captured the essence of the card game really well in the digital world. And that's where I was hooked, and I played a lot of Hearthstone. I hit Legends a few times, and there was even once I joined a Blizzard tournament representing Singapore for Southeast Asia bracket. And that was really a good experience to see like how it feels to play competitively in a digital card game. And after I joined Riot, given that we released not just Legends of Runeterra, we also released Teamfight Tactics, which is another strategy game. And that is how I played and achieved Master Rank, which I'm very proud of and often highlight whenever I get the chance to highlight it, because it's the only time I will never get Master Rank in League of Legends, and this is where I get Master Rank, and I feel very proud of it. Yeah, so this is pretty much my background when it comes to card game. And moving on, my background is actually helped me identify this type of players, which is like me, which I call it the casual competitive players. On the onset, you might think this sounds like an oxymoron, like casual and competitive. This doesn't seem to gel. Like, how can you be competitive and hardcore and casual at the same time? But it does exist. Like it is basically players who play casually, but actually they're super good at the game. Like how a quote I would say is like, I'm playing this game for fun, but at the same time I'm also trying to win. And this is more represented in a lot of these strategic intellectual games like card games and puzzle games. Mostly because these games, they require a lot less training to get good. Mostly it's a mental exercise to try to outwit and outsmart your opponent. You don't really need to like be very good at action per minute, which is as opposed to as what our traditional mindset of a competitive players looks like. Like in StarCraft, you have those 400 action per minute pros. In League of Legends and Valorant, you have those shooters and mobile players who practice like for thousands of hours and able to do all those insane reaction time and mechanical skills. These are less that apparent for a card game, and therefore it is possible to devote a bit less time in training and still get really, really good at a card game. And this is, to me, my instinct when I was playing Hearthstone. Like the journey from rank 5 to Legends is easily a 1-200 games journey, but to get to rank 5 is relatively easy. And that also gives you pretty much the confidence that I am good enough to get to rank 5, but do I want to put in the other 200 hours to get to Legends? Maybe not. And I do feel like I'm a good player at rank 5. I don't need to get to Legends. And that is the kind of mindset that I think a lot of casual competitive players would have as well. So moving on, I'd also like to share a bit about my passion about card games and describe to people who might not know what a typical card game experience might feel like. So generally, any card game in the world, when it's released, there'll be exciting new cards. You want to try the mechanics, create some decks, perform some combo. Those are where players would engage. And the reason why you engaged it is because there's all these mastermind moments that when you play a card, you feel really clever because you manage to outsmart your opponent, or you perform a very cool combo that make you feel like you are really the smartest person in the universe kind of things. And those are the really, really good experience when it comes to the card game. However, there are also the downside. Like for example, in the digital world right now, we have something we define as the meta. The meta refers to like the most popular way the game is being played. And this meta is often established really quickly when influencers and pro players, they would play the game very quickly, and within 1 or 2 weeks, they could get at like, this is the most powerful decks, and for the rest of the 2 months, everybody is playing the same decks. That typically happened, and that felt kind of not very good. And the other thing when it comes to a typical card game experience, especially now that I recall my youth playing Magic, it's actually a very expensive hobby that people will spend a lot to maintain. So moving on, this is where I think by knowing this experience and knowing what are some of the pain points that the players are feeling, it gives us an avenue to talk about how can we do better as developers, how can we understand, empathize with how the player feel and create features that are for the players. And today in my talk, I will give 2 examples centered around my experience as a casual competitive player. So I'll give one example of how we design a feature that is for casual competitive players. And another thing is about how we empathize and design features that is not like a player like me. Like I'm this type of player, how do I design something that is not for me? And how do we empathize with a player that's not for me? So right away, I'll get on to the first part, which is designing for a player like me, which is a seasonal tournament, one of the features we developed in the Riot Hong Kong and Singapore studio. So the seasonal tournament basically is to celebrate the players' mastery of a set at the end of the expansion. So this is the part that I mentioned a little bit, that when you play, when in a typical card game life cycle, at the start, when a new expansion is released, there's a lot of hype because there are all these new cards, but things tend to get a little boring after that when the meta is considered like soft and people are playing the same deck. So in introducing this seasonal tournament at the end of the season, what we hit and what we hope to accomplish, which I think was done quite well, is that instead of dropping off right away when it became boring, hopefully encourage our players to keep playing the game, get better at the game, and maintain their engagement that they want to qualify and enter this tournament at the end of the season and be able to showcase that they're really good at the game, they are very clever people, and they can win a huge prize money. And at the end of that, then the next card season is reviewed, the cycle repeats itself, and that's just the main purpose of it. And it's something that is really cool, but majority of card game players, they actually do not have experience playing in the tournament. And that is actually a problem because to me, like, it's a good experience. I myself, when I play in the Hearthstone tournament, I felt really good. I bring 3 decks and I play with them. But most players, they don't actually have the chance. And these tournaments, they exist. Like you go to any websites like Battle5, or you go to Discord and look for a community or Reddit. Tournaments exist all the time, but players might not be able to find them or are aware of them, and most do not have the experience of being able to play in something like that. And therefore, as the first step, we try to get the tournaments into the hands of every player, which is the gauntlet features that we are making. And this is the first step that we take to try to introduce the format to the players, so that every players who play our game get to know how it feels like to play in the tournament setting. So basically, Gauntlet is a game mode that's available on weekend. It's played in the same format as tournaments that is either like third-party tournaments organized by the community or our seasonal tournament. Is usually this format where players bring 3 decks and they have a pick and ban. And the reason, personally, I think that why this format is fun is that it has a lot of variety because you have 3 decks and your opponents have 3 decks. So it's not the same as the experience where you play on the rank ladder, where you bring 1 deck and you play the same deck over for like 8 hours. In this case, you have 3 decks, so often from game to game, you play different decks. There's also a player agency from your perspective because of the pick and ban format, in the sense that your opponent, in a ladder, you have no control over what decks your opponent bring. If there's a dominant deck in the meta, you might be facing that deck a lot of times. But in this pick and ban, you are able to like choose not to play against this deck by banning it from the opponent's lineup. And in this case, it gives you a control that you don't feel when you play the game normally. And this experience is really there in the tournament, but majority of the players actually do not have experience doing it, playing it. And this is one mindset that we have to try to introduce it into the client, so that a majority of players get to experience it and not have to go out of their way to go and look for these tournaments themselves to join on external websites. And as the next steps to that, we try to incorporate that mechanism into our seasonal tournament qualification method, so that we actually able to let our casual players have a way to enter the seasonal tournament as well. So for the seasonal tournaments, majority of our players that enter it will be, as we know, like the rank ladder, where players will play to the master's rank and be able to qualify into the seasonal tournament. We also set aside a smaller pool of 300 players that can qualify to playing the gauntlets. And gauntlet is a weekend event, as I mentioned. And if you were to play the gauntlet, you will be able to eventually qualify for the slot and also enter the seasonal tournament. And this mechanism may seem a bit counterintuitive, because usually you expect the most hardcore players, the pro players, to be able to qualify. These players need to show their dedication. They need to be playing 1,000-2,000 hours to show that they can be good at the game in order to qualify into something like a seasonal tournament. But for Gauntlet, we actually do something the opposite. Like, you just need to play on a weekend. You can be a weekend warrior. And if you are able to win several times in a row, you will be able to qualify into the seasonal tournament as well. and that really help us cater to a group of players that is not our traditional target audience for tournaments that are the pro players, but also for more casual fans of our game, and let them think about if this is something they like to engage in, if this experience is fun for them, and if they would like to play something like that. So moving on, I would like to talk also about another feature that we created in Hong Kong Singapore studio, which is the daily login rewards. And this is something that it is a feature that we launched roughly around our second expansion of our game, which is the Bilgewater expansion. And the purpose of this is primarily to encourage players to log in into the game consistently over a few days, and we give them a reward for doing so. The reason why I raised this as a point is because at this point, as a player myself, like it's a second expansion for the game, so I have already been very familiar with the cards, and at the same time, I'm also a seasoned card game player. I would generally think that a feature like this doesn't appeal to me. I myself is also not that much into mobile gaming mechanism. So things like daily login rewards, generally, I don't feel like I would be engaged by something like that. Like I would generally feel like it's a gimmick, I would ignore it, or I'm not hooked into daily login reward. So in all, it's basically not a feature that I would personally like. But how would I try to design something like this for our audience is something that I'd like to share. So to give a quick rundown, so this is what this feature look like, right? So when you log into the game as a new player, you will, every day that you log in, we give you a good reward. Typically in most games, this reward are very minor, like they could be like, like 10 in-game currency every day, something like that. But in our case, we give really big rewards, like a chest, a capsule. Those contains a lot of cards. And ultimately, at the 7th day, what you do receive is a new deck, which is unheard of in most card games. Like we don't give out decks usually because that's where you want players to receive, to buy your decks and to spend money on your game. So we do give out really good reward to the player. And moving on, I'd like to point to day 4 as well. So day 4 is where we also release new, going back to the previous slide for me to, So for this, I'd like to emphasize also that this is part where I try to share a bit of my experience. I try to give it to the players, where players of our game, when they started, they will be given some starter decks, and the playstyle of the starter decks are often quite typical and easy to understand for new players to experience. Like it is usually a mid-range kind of or aggressive kind of deck that is very easy for new players to know how to play. But usually for a new player, a combo deck or control decks are quite new and foreign. But I myself, when I was playing Magic in the past, my favorite color is blue. I like to play control decks because I think that the level of thinking for control deck and the kind of things that you can do when you play a control deck is quite interesting. And this playstyle is quite unique. So we incorporate that mechanism into our system, where on day 4, we start to tease by giving a card combo to our players. We give them Commander Ledros and Atrocity. So you can read the card on screen. Commander Ledros, when you play it, it does half of the, it basically does half of the Nexus damage, and you can combo it with a flashy spell later on, Atrocity, which will kill an ally to deal the damage to his power to anything. So in our game, Nexus have 20 health. So if you combine these two cards together, you can deal a maximum out to 19 damage and win the game. And it's a flashy and cool combo. Ideally, hopefully by day 4, when a new player receives this card combo, they start to think and visualize that, oh, this combo is cool. I want to use it in my deck. How can I use it? Maybe I try to reduce the mana cost so that I can play them in one turn. Maybe I try to control the game and do this combo. I want to do this combo at least once in my life, and I want to do it. So hopefully we can get that impression onto the players and make them feel like card game is not just about fair exchange of numbers, but also there are flashy combos that you can do that feels really good. And subsequently on day 7, we built a deck and we gave this deck to the player as well. And this deck contained first and foremost this combo. and that is to illustrate to the players that this is how you can use this combo in a deck by controlling the game, stalling it out, and be able to win the game with this combo. At the same time, we also choose a champion that is very resonant to the League of Legends community, which is Ashe, one of our most played champion and iconic to League of Legends, and give it to the players. Hopefully that will entice players from the League community to really like what we did and are excited to aim to acquire this reward and try to play this deck, basically. So moving on to a bit of a summary. So in all, when coming out with daily login rewards, for I myself, I would need to empathize with a player that is not like me, like a mobile game player. What makes them excited to log in daily, to want to engage with a mobile app? At the same time, also to try to think about the shoes of a new player, like when is the right time to try to introduce a new and more complex playstyle to them. This playstyle exciting to them, rather than mechanically implement a system that we just give them like currency over 7 days that generally might not be that much exciting. And some of the rewards we give are generous, like a new deck around Ashe. These are things that we definitely can monetize and try to make money. But I think we get a better value for our players if we give it to them and let them try to play it and feel really good about playing a champion that is iconic to the IP and to their love for League of Legends. Yeah, and the last point is basically what I briefly touched on earlier, try to explain that this is probably also the right time to try to let a beginner player know that card game isn't just about isn't that boring. Like there's new flashy combo you can do, there are new playstyle you can do, that you can try to be a control freak and try to control the board and win at the late game. So these are things that we open the players' mind to know that a bit of what I did is also try to spread my love for card game to new players so that they get to see that the card game there's much more to card games other than just simple like puzzle. Like there are so many different play styles, so many different variety, and encourage them to keep going on forever in our game. Yep. So I guess with that, that comes to a bit of a summary of what I've shared with everyone. So a bit of why I think player empathy is important as a game developer. That's because our players of video games, we are very unique, we are very passionate. It's very hard to understand us. You can't understand us by reading market research papers. You really need to be part of the community. And this part actually has been touched on by Matthew early on as well, how the game community is so unique and so special to us. So it's actually very important for us to understand the player empathy. Then after that, I gave an example of how I myself as a core gamer, how I try to use that in my game development to create something that I think will resonate with me and resonate with hopefully people that are like me. Then finally, I did give an example. On this one, I gave an example that I've worked on, but I think this is actually a very, very important skill, to be able to have empathy for different types of players that's unlike me. And this is especially relevant in the current landscape where we try to design for a broad spectrum of people from different countries, people from different economical class, people from different culture from yourself. So I'm only able to give an example of the daily login rewards because that's what I've worked on. But across Riot, across the game industry, people are actually constantly working and designing games for different types of players. And those are actually very, very important as well. So hope that for people who are interested, you can look up and be inspired and try to create this type of experiences as well. So with that, I think that's the end of our segment. We are now open to questions.
Okay, hi guys. Thank you so much for that session. So the very first big request that we have is everybody wants to see your dogfish. Like they're cheering for the dog.
They're scared. They're hiding. I'll try and grab one of them if they run by.
Okay.
I can get this. Hello. Ika. This is Leia, our youngest dog.
Oh, so sweet. Okay, so we have fulfilled the masses request. Let's get down to the questions. Yeah, so we have a question for Keane. You mentioned weekend tournaments are not for not so competitive players, right? So wouldn't there be a problem of tournaments getting like dominated by the really hardcore players? And or do they like not bother to usually join in for this, or are they banned from joining? Like how do you all manage it usually?
We don't really ban hardcore players, but hardcore players generally had the clearer path of entry, which is to play in the rank mode. So for them, that is actually a feature for them as well. For our weekend gauntlet thing, is the reason why I mentioned it for not so competitive is not really that case. It's actually for competitive player, but it's for casual competitive player, which means that we don't expect players to spend a lot of time in our game. They can just be playing for like a couple of hours on a weekend. And ideally, this is the kind of thing that I think it appeals. Like if I have that kind of format to play for other card games, I would be very happy to engage in them because I don't need to spend a lot of time. But I am a competitive player. So I want to showcase that I am good at the game, and being able to play something like this without investing like hundreds and thousands of hours, I think that it is something that is quite welcoming and doesn't, in a way, it also shows that a bit of like respecting the time of not so how should I say, not so hardcore players that maybe they have other parts of their life like taking care of a dog, and they would then be able to spend that time on the weekend to play this.
Okay, then as a follow-up, someone was asking what magic decks do you used to use back in the day. I think they were very interested in what deck.
Back then I was really
Fish is showing off all his deck.
The new magic set dropped
the
today.
same question should go to Fish as well.
Both questions to both.
Yeah, I did had a talk with Fish like a couple months ago, and we did share our love for magic and stuff like that. Yeah, so back in the days, I played a couple of decks. I started playing the Mirage era, Mirage to Exhaust. I'm most active during Tempest. So one of the decks I play that I played in actually back then there's tournaments organized in Suntec City that I sometimes go. And I play a counter burn deck, which is a red and blue deck. I like it a lot. Yeah, I also play a Pestilence deck because I like Pestilence a lot as well. So the counter burn deck, I started with, back then we have Mirage where there's Hammer of Garden, which is a pretty good card to use in that deck, which I did. Along with subsequently when after that, I play along with Pestilence because I like that. And with Pestilence, I have cards like Wrath of God and Armageddon in those decks, which I went on to play more control decks with those cards because I like that kind of play style. Subsequently, one day, all my cards were stolen. My Armageddons were stolen.
Oh no!
And then after that, I quit Magic. Now I remember. Thanks for reminding me of the bad times.
I'm so sorry. Okay, Fish, talk about your play style.
I play Burn. It's that simple. That's it. I just find what is the cheapest card for me to deal 3 damage to the opponent's face. I got to play Modern in the Singapore Grand Prix a few years back, and the opponent played a card on his first turn that got to see my hand. He looked at my hand and then he scooped up. He said, "Okay, we're going to game 2."
Oh my god!
That's the best. It's the best feeling in the world as a Burn player. It's like I have annoyed this person's immediate defeat before I even played one card.
He saw your card and he's just like, yeah, nah, I'm good.
Yep.
Let's go. All right. So I hope that answers that question. So, are there any interesting discoveries when you're like managing different communities? You see, like for different, maybe like certain player types responding to different methods of like some of the strategies that you've talked about previously. Yeah,
that's a really interesting question. Definitely, there's definitely. Different communities do respond very, very differently. And I think Keane touched on this quite a lot when he mentioned players like casual competitive players or hyper-competitive players. It's the same communities. You have very different communities that respond very differently to different initiatives. I'm not going to delve too deep into the psychological aspect of this because that's not my area of specialty. But we even see this in different cultures throughout different regions. Southeast Asia is very notorious for having a lot of different amazing cultures, which have many different languages as well. And we do discover a lot of interesting differences, but the one way that we're able to discover these is to immerse ourselves in towards those cultures and towards those communities as well, and then deeper understand what their community or what their culture is all about.
Okay, got it. So, with the next question, with different skill levels between casual and professional players and wanting to empathize with both parties, does it make it very difficult to balance the game properly? I mean, like casual, hardcore kind of situation. So yeah, that would be.
I think it's generally okay. So if you guys have been playing Legends of Runeterra recently, we created a new game mode. It's called the Labs of Legends. It's a PvE encounter versus AI, and it's a roguelike kind of playstyle. And I would encourage players who are mostly casuals to try it because it's really fun and addictive. You can do really very cool stuff like winning in turn 1, getting a full board of 5/5 units to go and attack and win very quickly. So those are really, really fun. So to answer your questions more directly, this is exactly the kind of strategy you can take. Like when it comes to balancing a game properly, this is generally what professional and more hardcore competitive players are looking out for. And in this case, you could do that and design game modes that are all about that, like try to make it fair and balanced for competitive players to play so that they don't feel like they, when they play a tournament, they get killed in turn 2 kind of stuff. Like you generally want them to be, the game to be balanced so that there's actually some back and forth and you can actually execute your skill and try to see that there's an interesting battle taking place between 2 players. However, when you try to design for casual players, actually you can throw this out of the window, right? Like maybe we can make it, it doesn't really need to be PvE, but PvE does help. Like you can actually create all this very cool, flashy kind of situation where you can win very quickly and have all those very flashy kind of combo to win in turn 2, turn 3, and your AI is not going to be angry at you. so that is actually something that is quite good, and I encourage, like if you're developing games like that, try to think in that aspect. Like you don't really need to make one game mode or one size fit all and everybody play in the same thing. You could actually try to see if that's your goal. If your goal is to hit 2 different audiences, that's what you do. You create 2 different game modes and see how people feel towards it. Alternatively, why not just focus on one? Like maybe if competitive is what you think your game is about, then you are willing to sacrifice or willing to just put aside some of the things that casual players might like to see and just focus on really empathize and focus strongly on your core audience and make sure that that's what they like before thinking about expanding to another audience segment, maybe. Yeah.
All right. We have a question for Fish. Do committee teams intentionally hero certain KOLs because brand safe or something? Or do you let the committee decide who gets heroed? I think this was the question. I'm not sure if I'm putting it across properly.
I think I understand. At the end of the day, Riot's policy has always been we're going to be the most player-focused company in the world. Put our players first. This also comes to who we work with when it comes to content creators. And a great example I like to draw back on is during the start of the pandemic in America, a lot of players were unable to jump into the Legends because they're at home at times that they weren't usually at home, and they weren't able to play because there was too much of a login queue to get into the games. And their influencer team in America made the decision to allow influencers to play. Which does sound a little bit counterintuitive. We're trying to be player first, but we're giving people a special priority. But the idea here is if you're not able to play the game, we wanted you to at least be able to watch your favorite personalities and content creators play the game while you wait. And it's a bit of both. So of course, we do want to empower the community to let us know who their favorite content creators are, and those are the people we love working with. At the same time, we want to work with content creators and personalities who align with Riot's brand. And I think Tyler 1 is a great example of this too. Tyler 1 has been championed by the North American community for the longest time, but for a very long time, he never worked with Riot Games, and that was due to a conflict with his personality and his brand and what Riot was passionate about. Eventually, over time, we saw a lot of changes towards what Tyler 1 was doing, and Riot Games ended up working with him.
All right. So hold on a moment. Let me just take a look. Okay. So back to Keane. When designing features, how do you balance the monetization needs, you see? Like, do you feel retention is more important than monetization? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Okay.
Tough question.
Yeah, this is slightly tougher because it's not what I do in my job. Like I'm not really into business or in monetization. So, but generally I can speak for as a designer. And I think that, to be honest, as a designer, both of these don't matter. For me, I think that because honestly, depending on the game you design, do you really need the game to have retention? Even like maybe the game that you design don't need retention. Like it's a one-off experience that is amazing. Like for example, an Assassin's Creed game that you just want to make a one-off experience. So in all in all, I think that it really depends on the game you are making and some of the goals that you're trying to hit. But I think that at the first thing that matters is really the players. Like whether the thing that you're designing is it good for the players that you're feeling are doing. So in this case, the same answer goes to both monetization and retention, because in monetization, players are spending money for your game. In retention, players are spending time in your game. And both are resources that you are expecting someone else, your customers, to be spending. And therefore, a lot of what is thinking about is not really about trying to make the most out of it, or like try to get some metrics up to a certain degree. But as a designer, mostly it's about trying to make sure that players are not wasting time or wasting money on your game, and they really get the value that they hope to get, and makes them feel really good about getting that value or the experience that you're trying to push to them. And that is the first bottom line I would try to hit as a designer. Like if I were to like receive a mandate to like try to compromise fun or good experience over for retention or over for monetization, I think that I would like generally try to push back and try to not just push back, but really try to tie that back in. Like how can we tweak this so that it became a good experience rather than just metrics that we are trying to hit. You know what I mean? Like even for the daily login rewards, I just explained that in that case, we are not trying to make sure that players log in every day, but trying to make sure that when players log in every day, they learn something new and they have a good time and they have something fun to play at the end of the day. Yeah, so that is the main reason for why we do certain things.
All right. So we have the next question for Fish. So parents today are more open to gaming and also participating in some social games, especially with their own children, right? But it's not clear if they understand, you know, one of the biggest key thing, which is gacha business model. What's your opinion on the reception of parents, guardians towards gaming and potentially gaming addiction these days, and their understanding that, you know, that gacha game is just one of the games and doesn't represent all of it?
Well, that's a lot in one question.
Yeah,
I'm gonna break it down. I'm gonna break it down slowly first, and I'm gonna first talk about the perception. Like what? Let me get the final part right, because I can see it typed out. The reception of parents and guardians towards gaming and potential and gaming addiction, as well as that gacha doesn't represent all games. So the way I'm gonna address this part first, and the first thing I always like to say is it's education. It was what, maybe 10, 15 years ago, where Harry Potter books were considered demonic amongst many parent groups, and video games were ostracized as something that's not good. And the only way that we're able to break these barriers is to educate and inform and have honest conversations with people about different subjects. In this case, it is very important to have honest conversations about gambling and addiction in general. People can be addicted to almost anything, and gaming does fall in that category. It's important to understand and establish what a healthy relationship with gaming looks like in both of those facets. And at Riot Games, we do understand that these two things can be issues that are difficult to tackle. Within our games at the moment, you can buy your content directly. There aren't those gacha systems that you usually see, and the best way to establish that there isn't there is a difference between those games and games that don't have those systems is education. Just let people know that not everything is like this. And at the same, have those healthy conversations. You could be a big fan of Genshin Impact like I am, and it's important to have the conversation that this is my hobby and this is what I enjoy doing, and I'm going to establish a healthy relationship with it.
Okay. I think that's a really good point as well. All right. So I think we have maybe time for one more question before we move on. So the last one will be Keane again, and again about the weekend tournaments. You mentioned the tournaments are meant to get similar skilled players to compete against each other. How will you foresee the pool of players being grouped up? And do you think these weekend tournaments will be another way to earn prime glory? So this is a very specific question.
Yeah, I think that this is something, I'm not sure what is referring to the weekend tournaments, but I assume it refers to our gauntlet or it refers to the third-party tournament. And anyway, it's okay, I would touch on both. I think that the pool of players that get grouped up, I think part of it is one of my instinct or my feeling is that I don't think that there is a very huge skill disparity between a really hyper engaged competitive player as well as casual competitive players in card games of our game, because understanding maybe competitive players might spend a lot more time. They can be like 5-10% smarter or in anticipating certain moves, but ultimately it's still a card game, so there's no incremental advantage in how fast you can move your mouse or how good you are at aiming. So there is the skill cap is actually much more, the skill band is actually much more narrow. So in this case, a player who are not that much engaged, they can join the same tournament as a pro. Like if I myself, I'm not that engaged in Hearthstone, but sometimes I get matched against famous names like Moss or and I managed to beat them. So it is a case where a lot of it is not directly tied to time. So in coming up with a format like this, we're actually trying to bridge the gap between a player that spends a lot of time versus a player that doesn't spend a lot of time. And both of them are actually competitive players. They are interested in the game. Maybe, arguably, even the casual competitive players, instead of spending time playing the game, they are actually spending time watching videos, reading up on articles, and getting actually better at the game in other means. And when they play in these tournaments, they can actually perform better than someone that is playing the game and grinding the game non-stop with a very narrow perspective. That could happen as well. So in terms of the definition, what we managed to bridge is not really about the time between the definition of a hardcore players being someone that spent a lot of time, as well as a casual player that's someone that is not good at the game. So that's not really true. Like a casual player can also be very good at the game, and a competitive player can also don't spend that much time and still be competitive. And that is the main thing that we were saying. So I see no huge issue in putting this pool of players together and having them play against each other, and that plays for actually a very good user story where someone who is not master rank managed to win the tournament. He could be very proud, and then we could be able to see us promote them and say that, oh, this person, they don't play a lot, but they are the winner of seasonal tournament, and that makes for a very good story to inspire more players to know that, yeah, this is exactly the experience we're trying to build for.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question, and I missed this out earlier. So, to Keane, sorry, have a lot of questions about your design skills. So, yeah, so does making new cards with new keywords or mechanics every season like eventually lead to burden of knowledge? Like, how do you deal with it if it happens, and like how do new players usually react to it?
Oh, okay. So a bit more. Okay, so on this one, mostly it's on the gameplay team and not the team here that works on it. So I will be able to share my perspective as a player, but not that much as a developer. So on this one, I think that it's something that you see that experimenting. Like instead of having one huge expansion with like 8 and 10 keywords, we actually broke the expansion out, and instead of being exposed to like 20 new champions, you get like 2 to 3 to ease your way into it. And that's one way to make it easier for a player that has been staying with the game to adapt accordingly. But of course, at some point, if you are a new player and you are going to join at this point in time, there might be a lot of keywords. So what we do about that? And that's actually one reason why we also have the Labs of Legends. So if you remember, it's an entirely PvE experience. There are a lot of different champions cards that are being featured over there. So as a new player, you actually have a low stress environment to be able to just pick one of the newly released champion card and play with the new keywords and mechanics to understand it. And you don't really just play one game. If you are afraid, you stop playing, because it's a PvE experience. It's low stress. You can keep playing and get really, really good and understand that mechanic very well. When you feel slightly more confident, then maybe you go in and play the ladder queue and play against other players. Without this mechanism to play with the PvP right away with all the new keywords, understandably, for a new player, that will be very daunting because you don't know the keywords well enough. You're scared that when you play queue, even if there's a casual queue, you don't want to embarrass yourself and lose very quickly. You want to get good at it first. And therefore, I think that the Labs of Legends is one way that we actually do to help this as well. So as a new player, go ahead and engage with that mode first, get yourself familiarized, and at some point, maybe you can engage in PvP afterwards. Yeah.
All right. Thank you both so much. I feel like we've riddled you with lots of questions. And thank you so much about sharing about your magic card decks. Hold on a moment, I'm having some audio issue. Hearing some weird stuff. Okay, yep. So once again, thank you both so much for your time. I think it was a really good session talking about like your perspective and like some of the considerations that you take into when managing the community or when it comes to like decisions in game development itself. So we do have more questions, I think, in Discord. So feel free, Keane, I know you do that. So feel free to jump into our Discord and answer any questions directly if you want to. And with that, I'm gonna be sending you out and I'll be getting the new guys in. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.